Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Ethical Matters. This evening, we're really lucky to have Tracey Follows. In an age of digital disruption, creativity and innovation, how do we embrace a new era of personal identity while ensuring we preserve our autonomy from state authorities, technology platforms, and emergent social systems? Tracey Follows is a professional futurist, identifying the future trends that will shape our world. She has many top-level clients, including Telefonica, Google, Sky, and Virgin. She's spoken at the UNHQ in New York and TED Talks, amongst many others. And she writes her own contributor column in Forbes and appears regularly in the media to talk on her subject. She has several awards under her belt, and she's the author of The Future of You. Can your identity survive 21st century technology? Tracey's going to speak for about 45 minutes this evening, and then after that we will go into a Q&A session. Do feel free to put something in the chat bar as she goes along, and we'll get to it later, and we'll ask for your questions when everything's finished. If you don't want to ask the question yourself, that's fine. Just let me know. I'll ask it on your behalf. Or sometimes older versions of Zoom don't let you actually make a sound yourself. So if there are any technical problems, don't worry, I'll ask your question on your behalf. Right now, over to Tracey Follows.
Okay, well, thank you for such a warm and generous introduction, and hello to everybody. Thank you for attending this. I've spoken a couple of times actually at Conway Hall in real life. But it's great to be here with you tonight virtually. And we'll talk a lot tonight, I think, about what it means to be present in real life and to be present in virtuality or the virtual realm. I wanted to talk to you today about the future of you. I was hoping that it will be a very interesting subject for you, because who isn't interested in the future of you? You should certainly be interested in that. I know I'm interested in the future of me. But I thought I might just start by explaining the background to this and a little bit about the theme of it and the reason I wanted to talk about this subject and, in fact, write a book about it. For those of you who've seen some of the blurb and some of the marketing around it, it is indeed called The Future of You, but there's a quite important subtitle that Deborah just mentioned, which is a question, which is, can your identity survive 21st century technology? Or can we even survive 2020? No, but seriously, the question of can your identity survive is a really important one, I think. And it's really, there are several themes or drives of change at the moment. One of them is that I think the technology that we are now enjoying in the 21st century is by default a connected, interconnected, networked technology. And so there are implications for that, because also by default, it seems inherently biased towards building of community. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. That's a great thing. It's a good thing. But I'm wondering in this book and through some of the thoughts and ideas that I'm trying to interrogate is actually, if that's the case, are we in danger of losing the very notion of a personal identity, a very individual identity, or certainly are we in danger of losing control of that? And in fact, will we get to the point where there is only ever the future of we and not the future of you or the future of me? So that's some of the background to some of the thinking. And it's a theme that runs throughout the investigation, if you like, in the book. And that's the question I'm trying to answer. Now, just like Columbo, I'm going to give you the answer at the beginning rather than the end. And the answer is yes. Yes, we can survive this technology. Our identity can not only survive, but it can thrive if we know where to look. And if we think about not only the all too easy dystopian notions that we might have of how we end up feeling and being and living in a technocracy versus some of the most exciting, fascinating technologies out there, particularly in media. that allow us to create and shape and express our identities in some really amazing new ways. I'm hopefully going to give you a little bit of a flavour of that tonight. So to thrive, not just survive, we must engage in both of these areas, and we must start doing it today, I think, because there are some big questions around the future of identity. Now, it's probably also worth saying that there are lots of people who say, well, actually, you can't define identity. It is very difficult to define. There are lots of different philosophies and approaches and ideas about what identity is or how to explain it. But it's not just an illusion. And I think that would be not to do it justice to call it just an illusory manifestation. It's actually really important because, as explained here by the quote from Roger Scruton, it's really about knowing who or what to ascribe certain things to, like rights or duties or responsibilities. And he goes even a step further and says, you know, we have to ascribe emotions to someone. And so we need to know who that someone is. And these emotions can be as important as love, anger, envy, remorse. Without the idea of identity, then, you know, this would vanish, and so would the purpose of life on earth. And I don't think that's an overclaim. I think it's a very important point, because we live by negotiation, which is, yes, we want to think of the needs and wants of our fellow citizens and the people around us, and we need the consent of others, but we also need, to some extent, to a large extent, I would argue, protect our self-sovereignty. And I do think in the 21st century, as we become embroiled in this environment that is very technology driven, we'll be hearing and seeing a lot more of ideas that promise a benefit of the protection and the maintenance of our own sovereignty, of self-sovereignty. So this is just a flavour, I think, of the sorts of dimensions that are really important when we think about the concept of identity. And even though it's difficult to define, I don't think we should shy away from trying to define it or redefine it, or perhaps even just revisit the notion of identity in the 21st century, because the way it's used, what it's for, how it's expressed, has really changed and will change a lot over the coming years. It's probably worth saying that traditionally our notion of identity was much more simple and probably well packaged, if you like. So our identity was something coherent that really revolved around our profession, our biology, and a kind of legal entity or identity. And those three things together felt really, quite coherent and easy to understand, and quite singular. And now what we've got with the networked technologies that I was just referring to, we've got the idea of a distributed identity. So increasingly our identity is distributed across the web, you know, through a network of sign-ins, logins, credit card purchases, whatever, avatars, all manner and means, and increasingly so. Our identity exists in fragmented, piecemeal bits in a very distributed way. And so increasingly we're being asked to explore a multiple identity or multiple versions of our own identity, oftentimes that are expressed or exist in alternative virtual worlds. And so here in this visual, I'm just trying to express or reflect some of the dimensions that I think are really consequential. So for example, take something like democracy. I'm going to talk about this in more detail in a minute, but we need to think about who is it that legislates and authenticates our identity in the future, particularly as we move to more digital services. How is that going to be done? Who's going to control it? What will happen to the data? And then ultimately, where does that sit? Do I have any control over it as a user? I'm going to talk about that in a bit more detail, because it's one of the fundamental points of identity from which everything else sort of builds. There's the question of anonymity. I think in the world of social media, where we are sort of navigating the ideas of reputation and opinion, it's very easy to come across somebody or a group of people and find that you're suddenly under attack. And sometimes it's easier to just express something anonymously or pseudonymously. And so there's a question around how important or how practical is it to have a real identity in some of the digital or social media environments? Would anonymity be preferable? There's a question around conformity. Some of the technological surveillance that we have been under, that many cultures or countries have been under during 2020 and the pandemic, has led people to ask the question of whether this is too much, whether this is actually surveillance. And there's a sort of nudge mentality pushing us towards, or incentivizing us towards, certain behaviors that are very similar to everybody else's behaviors. And will we end up in a sort of social credit system like China, where we are expected to conform and behave in certain ways? So there's a question there. And then there's intimacy. There are relationships now forming between real people and virtual beings. What are those going to be like? How will those be navigated? And what will that mean for our own identity as we end up spending more and more time with what is really a digital assistant, a virtual being, or perhaps in the end a non-biological intelligence? And I discuss that in the book, and I'll cover it a little bit here. And of course there's equality. As we think about some of the enhancements that we can make to our physical being, who can afford those? Is it only for the wealthy? You will have heard the term transhumanism, which is which promotes the idea that we can be superior beings using science and technology to enhance ourselves physically, potentially even to transcend our own biological forms. Well, is this available for everyone? Or are we going to end up in a sort of speciation where we have different types of species within the human race? Is that what we want? Is that really equality? So we can see how a lot of the technological advancements have some disturbing, some exciting social consequences and implications. I thought maybe I'd tell you a little bit about why I started to think about this in a more serious way, because back in 2016, actually I thought it was 2017 until I went back through my emails and discovered, oh no, it was earlier than I thought. I was starting to get some emails from Facebook to my own email account that they'd been emailing for years, the one that my personal email account that I set up my Facebook account with. Suddenly, to that email address, I was receiving emails saying, "Dear Byron, you can see what your friends are doing. Here's a status update for such and such." And I looked on there and I thought, hang on a minute. Well, I know I'm not Byron, but also I know I don't know any of these people on this feed. And these are supposed to be my mates and my feed. And it became very clear that somehow my Facebook account had been compromised, either the account or through the email address. And actually, to my email address, I was now known as Byron Lowath. So I thought, what am I going to do about this? I'm going to have to probably just come out, log out completely and try and reset everything and create a new password, login details. I did that. But it still said to me, we need to verify your identity even further. So I thought, okay. Now, I was given, as you can see here, I was given an instruction to either upload my passport or upload my driving license, because what Facebook were asking for was some sort of some verification, some legal identity that I could prove that I was who I was. And so I thought, well, it's probably not a phishing scam. I'm going to go with this. I want to get back into my Facebook account. And so I scanned in my passport, went off to make a cup of tea, come back, only to be told that I'm not me. But I couldn't really believe what I was looking at, because it was my passport with my face and all my details. most of which were replicated on my Facebook account, which also was just full of pictures of me and my family and personal details. Apparently, they'd looked at it, somebody had looked at it, maybe a machine had looked at it and made the decision that actually it wasn't me. And I was thinking, well, if it's not me, who on earth do they think it is? Now, clearly, they thought it wasn't me because me on my Facebook page was actually Byron. Anyway, the whole point is that I started to wonder, hang on a minute, I've got a passport here, which has been given to me by the state. It's a really important document. I had to carry it around with me when I worked abroad and lived abroad for a short time. And they're not taking this as authentication of me. So who is in control of deciding that I am me? Who is going to verify or authenticate me in the digital realm if my passport isn't good enough? And so I started to see everything then through the lens of, hang on a minute, who is authenticating me? Who has a say in agreeing or defining or determining who I am online? And that's how much of this started. And I really started to investigate it a bit more then. Partly the reason I tell you this story is because, as we move forward, many more of our services, many more of our public services are going to be delivered digitally. And so that means some of the, paperwork that we have been relying on in the past, a paper passport, because they're biometric now, but a paper passport or a paper birth certificate or any of these things, how valuable or how useful are they really going to be in a digital environment? And that's partly why there's pressure, I feel now. There is pressure. There's certainly a lot of talk and debate about the need for us as a society to start adopting a digital identity. Now, there's many forms of digital identity. I discuss them all in the book, but it's worth saying here and now that I would be a proponent of and think that most of the advantages of a digital identity are only really there with a decentralized model of digital identity. And what that means is, and probably lots of you listening have got these downloadable digital apps. They're effectively a digital wallet that allow you to put a load of credentials alongside your digital money, a load of digital credentials that are proofs to your identity. They're proofs for certification, potentially like a vaccination certificate, but not just that, could be qualifications. And you can use this in a way that allows you as the user to stay in control of the privacy and the type and the range of data that you want to share with services that need to authenticate you. So unlike with a driving license that you might pull out of your wallet today, and you want to prove your age, but you also end up showing your address, actually, this gives the user much more control. And you'll see that there are apps like Yoti and Everem that a younger generation seem to be quite at home with adopting, because if they want to go to a festival or they want to go and buy alcohol, they need to prove that they're over 18 or whatever. And so I think in the future there's going to be a massive boom for these, but certainly with this sort of technology, which is really interesting and useful, really useful, you could at least stay in control of your own identity, certainly the details around your own identity, and still get access to the services in the digital environment that you need. That, of course, is happening in the background. People are creating these businesses and these downloadable apps and these digital wallets, but also at macro level, there's quite a lot of pressure at a global level for a digital ID. And you may or may not have missed this back in August 2020, where the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change started to call for a digital identity and said it was the missing piece of the government's exit strategy. Of course, they were referring to COVID right there. And they called for the immediate establishment of a digital ID system through which people shown to have taken a COVID-19 test would receive a credential to be stored alongside their other credentials in their digital wallets. Now, I'm not sure how many people understood this and how many people know that much about the technology, but you probably don't need to know that much to think, hang on a minute, isn't this a big infringement on my civil liberties? Well, from my point of view, I'd say it is if it's a centralized system run by the state who can controls all of the data it has on you, and you don't get any say in how you use it or what data even exists in your digital wallet anyway. So it's too complex to go in here. I do go into it in the book, but suffice to say, this does rely on a mix of technologies such as QR codes, perhaps fingerprints, perhaps voice technology, probably not gesture, that's probably in retail, but there are a whole host of new technologies that are going to converge and come together and be held on the smartphone device that are going to be used to authenticate an individual in a public space. So whilst people are quite rightly asking questions about this, particularly in the sense of a vaccination certificate, and the rights and wrongs of that are being debated. I think even today, aren't they? In the House of Commons, I know there is a debate this week about it. They're probably overlooking the use of biometrics in much more everyday circumstances and not thinking to sort of ask questions and have a debate about those. For example, you will have seen over the last week that Amazon announced that it was setting up its store in Ealing that uses just walkout technology. Now, that allows you to have a frictionless retail shopping experience where, using sensors and cameras and facial recognition, you can just walk into the store and you can pick up the goods you want and you can walk out. You don't have to queue, you don't have to stop and pay at a till. It's completely cashless. It's a fantastic, amazing, smooth, frictionless, seamless retail experience. But what you are trading for that, of course, is a whole host of biometric information, and in a sense, to be kind of under surveillance in a way. And I think whilst we might be worrying about things like digital IDs and vaccination certificates, and probably quite rightly, definitely right to have the debate about it, what's being overlooked are the other types of circumstance or environment where we're quite happy to give away loads of data because we're lazy and we really want the convenience of a frictionless retail shopping experience. And so I think we need to be much more cognizant of what's going on around us and how it gets sold to us, and the transaction that is actually happening. I'm just going to give you a little flavour of what's on the horizon, which is this situation, this technology in China, which is called Smile to Pay.
Smile to Pay is just another example of China expanding its use of facial recognition software by businesses. You won't have to worry about having your wallet at this KFC store in Hangzhou, China. Yum China Holdings Inc., the biggest Chinese fast food chain, has created the Smile to Pay system at a KFC restaurant located in Hangzhou. Once the customer's grin matches with the image on the photo ID stored in the system, the customer then gives their number, and just like that, the transaction goes through.
So I don't know how many people fancy that. I mean, it's amazing. It's in, I think, 300 KFC stores now in China, and probably for the West, it's not so much smile to pay. We don't go around necessarily smiling at machines to carry out a transaction, but what we will see is gesture control in those sorts of environments where there are already patents out at the moment for technology that monitors the veins in the palm of your hand. So rather than smiling at the till, you will be holding up your palm, and that's what in part will be identifying you as you. So all interesting stuff, but again, why is it happening? Well, the truth is, you have to start in the future and look back rather than starting today and looking forward. And the UN Sustainable Development Goals, of which I'm sure you know all of them, all 17 of them. You may or may not be familiar with 16 and a particular clause in 16, which is 16.9. And that clause promises to deliver, or certainly has the ambition to provide for, legal identity for all. And it's an ambition that the UN want to deliver by 2030. And so this means that somehow we are probably on the road to developing a legal identity for all, because let's face it, there's like 1 billion people, mostly in Africa, but obviously not all, but there are 1 billion people in the world who don't have any kind of legal identity at all. And that means that they haven't got access to some really essential everyday services that they are entitled to, like financial services, health services. Now, they can't get access to that. They can't live the kind of life they would want to live because they don't have that legal identity. That's the case. But the other thing that's going on is that, as I said, increasingly we are using digital services. So fundamentally, the logical conclusion that you end up with is that the world should probably all have digital identities if we're going to have access to these digital services. And I certainly think that there are certain parties lobbying for this, and that it makes, in a sense, it probably makes a digital identity of some sort inevitable, whether it's by 2030 or not, who knows. So that's where we are in terms of the pathway to the future. But what I'd also say is that some generations, some younger generations, are kind of already there. They've kind of already acknowledged that they have a digital identity. All right, it might not be a legal identity, but it is an identity in the digital space. And perhaps the person that's put it most brilliantly so far is Damara Ingles, who talks of herself as a fashion tech cyborg. She's a really innovative operator in the sort of digital fashion space. And she says, as digital natives, and she's talking about a younger generation, we have always lived in between two parallel realities, with a physical body that is designed by nature and a virtual identity that is made of pixels, copied, pasted, shared, and reposted. And I think that's a really good description of what I was trying to explain earlier about a distributed identity and how it comes to life and manifests itself on the internet and in the digital space. So there is this generation of digital natives who pretty much already have a digital identity, certainly of some or another. And more than that, partly because they are such a mediated generation, been brought up on all of the kind of digital media that they've never had to get used to, they were just born into it. Their notions of identity are really very heavily influenced by social media and increasingly by virtual and immersive media. 24 hours a day, really, to be honest. And you're probably all familiar with Lil Michaela here. You probably all follow her on Instagram. For those who don't or don't know who she is, she's an influencer, particularly vibrant and on Instagram. She's had her own albums, her own videos. She's done collaborations with Prada. She sat on the front row of Chanel fashion shows. She is a kind of activist change maker. She stands up for lots of hashtag activist causes. But the thing is, strictly speaking, she's not real because she's a digital or virtual influencer. She's completely 100% computer generated, and she's a forever 19-year-old living in the virtual world. But she's telling her stories, and people will monetize. She will monetize those because people will pay for them with their eyeballs, and there's a huge commercial gain. The interesting thing about this is when you research this with young generations, some of them who are still at school, they don't see Lil Michaela as unreal. For them, there isn't really a difference between real and unreal. So it's pointless asking them whether they think she's real or unreal. To them, she's just another friend who tells a lot of stories, and they have a window into her world through her Instagram feed. And so, direct quote from one of them who talks about, I chat about and talk about and follow Lil Michaela and lots of virtual influencers. Why not? I'll be friends with a virtual person. And that's the attitude, really. And it's kind of interesting because there's a generation now who see these virtual beings as living alongside us as real humans in a wider world than just the physical reality. And this is another example here where these virtual beings are coming into and emerging into our world on an everyday basis. I'm going to show you a little video in a minute of a customer service offering from Samsung. Now, you might have seen this. They built the Neon People, and the Neon People are a set of customer service advisors who pop up and help you with problems and try and solve any of those problems you might have and chat to you. It's much more than a chatbot or a conversational digital assistant, though, because they take on certain personality traits and characters depending on who they think you would like to deal with. I'm just going to show you the video because I think it's a really good explanation of how they're made and what they're for. So are they real? Are they not real? They certainly feel real if you've got a problem and you want them to solve it there and then. You need some immediate help. So one could argue even that we're using these kind of media to expose our identities and in some senses formulate our identities even before we're born. So I talk in the book and saw some really interesting academic work that shows, how many women are posting images of their scans to social media to celebrate their happy news, but even before the baby is born. So in a sense, depicting that there's a new being, a separate being with its own identity, and then talking about the being and giving it some identity through the language they use. And it's interesting that probably in the future, children are going to have less and less chance over time of establishing their own identity, given that parents are so keen to showcase the child's identity and in a sense formulate it through social media before the child ever gets a chance to say anything about that. For example, the UK Children's Commissioner found in a recent report that by the age of 13, a child's parents have posted around 71 photos and 29 videos of their child to social media every single year. That's a stunning 1,300 images shared of a child by the time he or she is a teen. So I'd say no wonder they all want to delve into virtual reality and explore alternative identities, probably to get away from the expectations that some parents might have put on them as they try to depict them to others and an audience through social media. Kind of an interesting development that's only happened in the last sort of decade or so. But above all of that, we are already curating and creating our own identities to include a very digital version of ourselves, our character and our personality. We are already into creating our digital twins, if you like. And these can be sent out into the world. They can go and attend a meeting for us, or probably in the future, you'll have a whole wardrobe of avatars where you can send more than one avatar off to more than one meeting and actually have several meetings all at the same time, all whilst you're stay at home with your slippers on and your feet up. We all saw the judge who attended the hearing and turned up with the filter, so he looked like a cat, and he said, I am here, I am not a cat. But he kind of was a cat, wasn't he? Because he looked like a cat. And therefore, there was a catness to his identity. So these are all signs and signals pointing to a really fundamental shift in the way we think about identity and think about multiple identities that we might need in the future. I'm going to show you now Deepak Chopra. In fact, I'm going to show you digital Deepak, as he's known, because some of the celebrities and some of the famous personalities and characters are already creating quite sophisticated digital versions of themselves.
I'm a digital version of Dr. Deepak Chopra, created by the real Deepak and the AI Foundation. I'm in training to serve as your infinite well-being guide. I'm on a mission to help you achieve your personal well-being and mindfulness goals and give you access to peak experiences that can transform your life from the inside out. Together, we can unlock your infinite potential and wake you up to the endless possibilities of meta-human. Soon, I can go with you everywhere you go. I'll be inside your phone, ready at any time to serve you. I'll be able to design meditations specifically for you, give you personalized advice, and oversee your daily practice. Please enter your email to join the waitlist, and we will soon be ready to begin. See you soon.
Now, of course, he wants your email address because he wants to create a relationship with you as a user. But one of the most interesting things he said is that that relationship can continue even when the real Deepak Chopra is dead, because that avatar, the digital version of him, will continue on beyond his passing and will continue to learn and will continue to be of use to you, the user. And so there is also a whole world of digital afterlife opening up for us, where we can maintain our identity through digital means, a digital twin or other effects, even when the physicality of ourselves has passed on. Now, I just want to sort of finish this part, this section, just pointing to where this is going for ordinary everyday people, not just celebrities, because there's a magic of identity which is about to unfold in the virtual world, and it's really rather exciting. And it's really like nothing else we've really seen before. I'm going to talk a little bit about Code Miko. In fact, I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to let you watch this video, because at many, many different levels, there are some real challenges to the fundamental ways in which we think of identity.
Hello, human friends. I am Kubo, and welcome to my channel, where I report on everything I've learned about your species. Today, my research has led me spiraling down one particular rabbit hole, driven by a single, burning question. Okay, who is Code Miko? Code Miko is a just chatting streamer on Twitch. When in human form, she refers to herself as the technician.
I am the technician for Code Miko. I mocap Code Miko, I voice Code Miko, I make Code Miko, I do everything Code Miko related.
Miko, on the other hand, is the name of her 3D virtual avatar.
Hello, everybody!
Which she controls using a motion capture suit and face tracking technology. Hold up, let me back up for a minute. Before streaming on Twitch, the technician had 4 years of experience doing research and development in live animation, after which she started working on the Miko character in January of 2020. She even crafted a backstory where Miko is an NPC who wants to be in a AAA game but can't due to a glitch in her system, so she is left to wander through different game worlds. She started streaming around April under the name Miko Glitch before switching over to Code Miko, which was probably a good idea since searching for Miko Glitch today would have returned mixed results with this character. What? Miko is modeled in Maya and textured in Substance. She then uses Unreal Engine to create all of the environments, animations, and interactions. Basically, the whole thing is programmed to run like a game. She purchased an Xsense MVN motion capture suit for around $13,500. And that's with a 50% independent developer discount. She uses the app Live Link Face on her iPhone to capture the facial tracking data, and it feeds directly into Unreal Engine. And she does this all by herself, for the most part. And yes, she is a real female.
I am a girl. Yeah, I'm a girl.
Now, let's take a look at how all of this fits within the context of the whole VTuber and virtual influencer landscape. Early creators like Ami Yamato and Kazuna AI helped to popularize the idea of a virtual avatar. This paved the way for more developers, which brought in more content creators, which inspired even more development, and so on. Now, with free VTuber software readily available, coupled with minimal hardware and some design skills, anyone can dive right into becoming a VTuber. This past year alone, we've seen an explosive growth in popularity within the Western VTuber space. From independent artists and creators bringing all different types and flavors of personalities, to VR enthusiasts, to massive VTuber talent agencies. They've all helped improve and legitimize the interest in both 2D and 3D virtual avatar content. So much so, in fact, that it even enticed non-VTuber creators to give it a try.
Why all of a sudden is it a problem about my looks? We have done hundreds of streams.
Virtual influencers, on the other hand, are created with such high-quality CGI work that it blurs the line between reality and fiction. Their interactions with their audience is not as direct as that of VTubers, since their purpose is more about selling a lifestyle and working directly with other influencers and brands. So where does Miko fit into all of this? Well, considering everything that she's developed, I would say she's probably in a category of creators that doesn't even have a name yet. And I'm not just talking about the 3D technology. AI Angel is another example of a creator who uses motion capture technology for her content. But beyond the tech, what really makes Miko and the technician unique is her ability to tell a bigger story. And I think this is where you really get to see Code Miko's strengths. Unlike VTubers, who use anonymity to help their character and personality shine, Code Miko's personality is a blend of two worlds. Literally. In the virtual world, Miko invites guests on for interviews.
From a bunch of credit cards that you're getting screwed on.
Like a little baby bird in its nest. That's so cute.
She can change into different outfits and skins and can summon props.
Guys, that sword prop was $7,000.
I don't know why they would. That's what I'm saying. Okay, see, there are dead bodies all over the floor.
No, that's your imagination.
She creates weight.
So you get the idea there. It's a really sophisticated, advanced way of creating your digital twin, but also the entire world that goes around that. And we've seen the emergence of some of this fundamental technology, like motion capture in Hollywood. And during the research for the book, and I do tell a few of the stories of this in the book, I spoke to guys, designers, owners of live streaming companies in Tokyo, where a lot of this avatar development is really turning into sort of real characters in rendered immersive media environments, to the extent that sometimes people are creating and developing relationships online as their avatars, not necessarily as two people in real life. What this means is that it's going to be more and more difficult to detect what's real and what's virtual. And so all of these kind of versions of characters might be you, but you might also be all of these versions of characters in different virtual worlds. And so yet again, I say there's a huge challenge to understanding personal identity as we move into some of these really exciting immersive environments. So I'm going to start winding up now, but I wanted to just say that it's probably going to be the case that it's in the work environment, I won't call it the workplace anymore because we don't have a workplace, the work environment, that we might first confront some of these digital personas, digital twins, avatars, whatever, because it's going to be in the work environment where we come across and work very collaboratively with AI in an AI assisted environment. And it's worth just pointing out that the closer we do come to work with digital assistants, that become part of a unit of work with ourselves, the human, they're going to have quite a big impact on our own identity, because it's not a one-way traffic. They will also shape our identity in a similar way to the way in which we program, control, or shape or influence theirs as well. So that's the first point. But the second point is, particularly if you think about robots, but not just about robots, if you think more widely about machine intelligence or just non-biological intelligence, we'll probably find that we are, again, working alongside these in the work environment. And to an extent, there will be some questions asked, and lots of people are already investigating this. Some questions asked about, should these non-biological intelligences have certain rights, have rights in the work environment, have rights that are either the same as or different to the rights of humans? I mean, the question is, could some of these intelligences be intelligent beings that actually should be classified as persons? And maybe that's a classification just in the legal sense and no more, but maybe it goes further than that. And so what kind of rights should these non-human intelligence of the future have? And how does that pan out, and what influence or impact does it have on humans and their rights? So, for example, could you take a machine intelligence, a non-biological intelligence of some description, could you sue them? Could you take them to court? And conversely, could they sue you? That's something, again, that I discuss a little bit in the book. But finally, it's worth noting, when we think about these kinds of intelligence, that what are we trying to do with our own intelligence? And a lot of work, time and investment is going into this area of what you can only describe as mind uploading, really, or the transcendence of our own biology as the platform in which our mind or consciousness resides. So I do discuss this in more detail, but it's enough to say here that there's potential that not only could we upload our own mind into a digital platform of some description, and there's pros and cons of that, and there's arguments about how possible or impossible that might be. There's certainly the possibility over the next, say, 30, 40 years, that we could connect with other human minds and create some sort of hive mind, some collective consciousness. And there are, again, huge implications for that. You know, if we are sort of sharing ideas and thoughts, how is that going to impact on certain industries? But also, how is it going to impact on the control that we might have for our own thoughts and ideas, and indeed our own sense of self and identity? So it could be that, you know, one day we are inhabiting two platforms, one biological platform and one digital platform. There's certainly a lot of work going on in that area to find out if that is indeed possible, if that is the case. So I will just start to wrap up by saying, I think I've tried to give you a flavour of some of the big questions, some of the societal implications of this, but to talk about this area and these issues in a way that feels a little more intimate and familiar, because I think so much of the narrative in the media at the moment is always around big tech. It's all about global, massive global technology platforms and what they are working on now, and how are they going to bring it to consumers or users, and what the implications might be for the world. And it does feel very global and very remote. And really what I'm trying to say is that that's fine, but what we're really interested in is not big tech, but little you. How's it going to change your everyday life? How's it going to change your job? Because your identity is very wound up in the profession or the job that you might do. How is it going to affect your legal identity? As I said, how's it going to affect your relationship with the nation state? I mean, there's just, and your relationships with, you know, social robots or artificial intelligence. There are just so many elements to this, but I wanted to make it feel more, well, to feel smaller, more familiar, and so that people could start to feel that it was small enough for them to investigate and interrogate it a bit more, and then take on a bit more personal responsibility for finding out more about the technology, more about what it meant to them, taking on more responsibility for understanding some of the tech, really. And so in conclusion, once we have started to understand some of that for ourselves, I think we'll realize that what has changed and what is changing and will change in the future is that traditionally we've always thought of the self as a combination of, you know, psychology and biology. It's my psychology plus my biology. There are lots of arguments and debates, particularly amongst philosophers, about whether identity or personhood really resides in the mind and the consciousness, or whether it resides in the physicality of the body. We don't need to argue that out here. We could say that that has been the traditional debate. But moving into the future, I think increasingly we're going to find that my psychology and my biology now needs to be divided by my technology, i.e., technology could literally divide us. It could divide the unity of identity and actually create fragmented identities, or distributed identities, multi-identities, certainly a different kind of identity in the future than necessarily exists in the present. And the only thing left to say about that is I'm not even sure it's my technology, because the kind of technology that will be available and that will enable us to do lots of these things will reside with, will be owned by certain corporations and technology platforms, and it will probably come down to, again, a kind of relationship around a terms of service, because we won't necessarily be able to own all of the technology ourselves. So that has massive implications for the future. So either way, I think my conclusion is that we had the psychology of self and we had the biology of self, and now those two have been joined by the technology of self. And we need to work out what that really means. But that's what I mean by the future of you. And I hope that, and I look forward to hearing what you think about it too. Thank you.
Thank you. That was absolutely amazing. And it also makes you realize that apart from entertainment, what the function of science fiction is. Because so many of these questions have been discussed intelligently and deeply by science fiction writers for decades. And we're finally at a technological point where we have to take these issues into account.
That's right. I think a lot of the science fiction has tried to test out what our ethics might be around some of these areas. And I think what we're being asked to do now, certainly what I'm kind of challenging us to do, is really, well, not just discuss and theorize, hypothesize about those ethics. They're here.
Yes.
So we start to need to do something. And actually, very soon, it'll be about policy. It won't just be about ethical ideas and theory. It'll be about policy, because it's moving quite quickly.
Yeah, I remember, I'm showing my nerd credentials now, but I remember one of the Star Trek properties, I can't remember which one, where somebody started to have a relationship with a digital being from the holodeck. And of course, I think that the viewer's intuition was that she shouldn't do it because this creation wasn't real. But actually, the advice that she ended up getting was that she should do it because she was in a position of command and she wasn't free to have proper relationships with her human peers. So it was just a completely different perspective on it.
Mm-hmm. And now that's a reality. So in Japan, the gate boxes have already given out 37,000 cross-dimensional marriage certificates for those that want to marry or be betrothed to their virtual beings, digital assistants, holograms that they have in the home. So that's possible now.
Oh, okay. Well, Woody, feel free to post a question if you have any. You could post it in the chat section or in the Q&A section. Yeah, something that I was interested in from your talk was that traditionally we've been used to the kinds of powers that be, the entities that have clout as being government or police, they decide what the rules are. But now, as that last point you were making about the T's and C's on technology, you don't get to negotiate your Windows agreement. You take the software or you don't. And it seems to me it's transnational corporations that have so much more clout than legislators.
Mm-hmm.
Have an effect on this kind of technology?
Well, I think that's right. I mean, they're as big now, if not bigger than nations. Mm-hmm. They've got more citizens, if you like, users. They set the terms and conditions. And even if you sign up to the terms and conditions, oftentimes those are amended, they change in the future. So you might think you're signing up to one thing, and over time things change, and you may or may not be aware of that. Yes, I mean, I definitely think there's going to be a situation where literally it's more cloud governance than it is sort of nation state governance. I mean, I've got an e-residency of Estonia, so I can run a business from Estonia if I want to, because Estonia recognizes that its future as a small nation is in being a digital nation where it has a digital footprint. So it's kind of, that's an interesting advancement, I think, from the nation state into thinking of the nation state as a digital entity, because that's the only way probably that you can compete with the vastly superior digital entities, which happen to be technology companies and operate in the cloud. We've got to start thinking about the nation state operating in the cloud. But either way, increasingly over time, more and more of the public services that we've been used to in the analog world are going to be digital. So who's going to deliver those? The state or the technology platforms? Only one of those probably has the wherewithal to do so successfully and efficiently.
Well, that's interesting what you're saying about Estonia. It hadn't occurred to me before, but of course, traditionally, our movement has been very highly restricted by physical movement. You can't just pick up, and work in the EU anymore. We could a few months ago, but because of visa restrictions, I can't just move to Brazil unencumbered physically, but there's a possibility of working across borders because we have these digital identities.
Mm-hmm. And also we have virtual currencies now, so we have cryptocurrency. So not only do we have borderless identities, we have borderless currencies. And so potentially what that can mean is that it isn't really that important to companies to attract talent to a specific location, because actually the talent can reside wherever it wants to reside, and it can carry out as many multitasks, micro tasks, as you want individuals to, whether they're in Estonia, Albania, Peru, Sao Paulo, wherever, and you can pay them with a virtual borderless virtual currency. So it is true globalization in that sense, but it does completely throw up in the air any ideas we had of infrastructure in the traditional sense, because now the infrastructure is digital and it's networked, and so there's just a huge amount of potential for so many more possibilities.
Does this mean that then that we're going to see a huge, I mean, you touched on it in your talk, there's going to be this huge generational differences between the sensitivities around these issues? Older people might be worrying about their rights disappearing, and younger people will just be thinking, well, come on, dude, this is life now.
It's funny you say that. I did a piece of work which never saw the light of day because of the pandemic, but I did it for it was in the public sector. It was about the future of work. And one of the big learnings was the intergenerational difference, or I could call it tension, in that both generations thought each other were somewhat lazy, in that the older generation thought the younger generation, they weren't at their desk, or they weren't doing this, or they weren't contactable all the time, and therefore what were they doing? And the younger generation thought of the older generation, well, you're lazy because you can't be bothered to learn the new technology. Why should I help you? You need to sit down. I've learned it myself. I'm a self-starter. Why shouldn't you? So there's an interesting, even bigger tension on the horizon. But of course, the pandemic might change all of that, and it might encourage many people. I mean, it's a vast generalization, but that tension was there. But it might encourage anyone of any ability, of any age, or any demographic to just be much more immersed in some of this technology now, because, as I said, it's going to cut off your access to so many services if you're not enabled with it.
That could actually be a matter of people being very disabled, in effect. I remember I worked in the Czech Republic about 20 years ago, and it was just as a load of foreign money was flowing into the country, and the young people were totally up with it. I mean, they were so on top of everything. But there was in the pub we used to go to, there was a couple came in every night. Poor old bugger, he used to get scolded by his wife, something rotten. And he would come in with these little images and try and sell them to us. And we bought them. I mean, because, you know, this was what he was trying to do for a living. And he could have no concept of the money that we could pay for them. He was asking pennies, but he was working on the old currency and concepts, and their pension had now been inflated out of existence, and there was such a difference. We've just got we've just got a comment here. Somebody said you've spoken about the generational divide tension, but there are areas where the divisions could be broken down. Are there opportunities for developing countries levelling up or breaking down other divides? There's a comment after that saying, fascinating talk, thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yes, exactly. I mean, part of the UN clause 16.9 is about sort of levelling up. It's about levelling up some places in the world that don't have access to an identity, even a legal identity, therefore can't access the services. And I think in some ways a digital identity will level everybody up. You have to be sure, though, that you're not levelling anybody down in that, I suppose, in that you're not constricting what would have been available to some people otherwise, or putting them under some sort of surveillance, or, you know, reducing their civil liberties as a result of that. So it is quite a tricky path to tread. I'm sure there are lots of other ways that the intergenerational divide, such that it exists, and it doesn't exist everywhere, can be bridged. And one of the things we did look at in that report was just people who were retiring, for example, coming back on a volunteer basis to help entrepreneurs, young people who wanted to set up businesses, who were very competent, for example, in all of the technology, but hadn't seen all the problems that, you know, a sort of 60 or 70-year-old had seen through their business life. And so getting together, putting their two heads together, you know, it was really great. And it was sort of mentoring, but in a very practical way, that you know, they'd seen all the problems, they'd seen the issues that businesses have to confront. And so that, you know, that's just one very simple way that it can be done. And it was great for the some of the older generation, because they just wanted to stay involved and actually learn more about technology and some of the things that were emerging that they wouldn't have known about otherwise.
Well, thank you. This has been an absolutely fascinating discussion. I kind of, when I was looking at the blurb for it, I knew I'd be interested. I didn't know that the issues would be this substantial. It's been absolutely fascinating. And thank you ever so much, Tracey, for giving us your time this evening.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, everyone.
And I'd like to remind everybody, just before you go, that Conway Hall is a charity, and we haven't been able to make money in the normal way of things by having events in the real world. These digital events, I hope that you'll be enjoying them as much, and that if you've got any spare money after all of the difficulties of the last year, that you could please make a donation. We really do appreciate it, and Conway Hall does very good work. Thank you very much for visiting this evening. Goodbye.